Mikel Arteta's Arsenal have often been accused of trying to control games too much, but it looks like they're starting to lose some of that control. Are they starting to feel the pressure? Let's get into it. Today, we've got Alex Barker, Jon Mackenzie, and James McNicholas. All right, James, level with me. It's quite stressful watching Arsenal, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I actually had a full head of hair before the start of this title race. It's really taken it out of me. No, it is stressful. It is stressful. It's especially stressful for the supporters, given the recent history, right? You know, they've come so close. They're so desperate to get over the line this time. And the nature of the games as well. They've often had these kind of narrow advantages, narrow leads, and it's made for quite a nervous situation. You know, they haven't exhibited the kind of control that we're accustomed to seeing with Arsenal. And it's got fans biting their fingernails for sure.
Yeah, from your perspective, I guess as a journalist as well, like, is there anything you're hearing from the inside? Is there any pressure brewing within this squad? Because of course, I mean, it's been quite a while since they won the Premier League.
Yeah, there's expectation as well. And that expectation has built over time. And, you know, Mikel Arteta's undoubtedly aware of it. We've heard from some of the players. Jurrien Timber's spoken very honestly about that, about the reality of nerves and pressure and stakes. And of course, that has an impact on performance. There's no way you can doubt that. I'm sure it's a factor. But I'm really interested to learn today about kind of other things that might be influencing that lack of control from the kind of tactical side, the technical side. What is there that Arsenal can do to try and make what remains of the run-in a little bit less stressful for the fans?
Well, let's get into it then. Alex, look, how can Arsenal make it a little bit less stressful for the fans? There's clearly a fair bit of anxiety from fans and players on the pitch.
Yeah, I think there's some examples Arsenal fans can point to, right? Mainly individual ones, I think. The obvious ones which have resulted in goals. We've got an example here, actually, against Manchester United when Arsenal 1-0 up. Zubimendi's on the ball. We have Saliba about to receive it. And it's worth saying, as Saliba gets this pass, there's a very big shout from the crowd of man on, which obviously is common in stadiums, right? But it kind of plays into, again, Arsenal fans' anxiety a bit. And maybe that's why Saliba feels the anxiety, because he takes a bit of an awkward touch and plays a pretty awkward pass to Zubimendi, who handles the pass very awkwardly and obviously ends up giving away a goal to Bryan Mbeumo. This is an obvious example, right? And I think a couple of players have attracted criticism, but there are some more subtle examples of players, I think, feeling the anxiety, maybe panicking later in the game at times. One of those times was against Chelsea recently, when Arsenal were 2-1 up. Chelsea are down to 10 men. The ball is with Chalobah. Arsenal pressing up quite highly, maybe taking advantage, right, of Chelsea being down to 10. Pay attention to this area of the pitch. We've got Hincapié tracking Enzo Fernandez. He keeps following him, but as play progresses, Hincapié starts to look backwards and think, maybe I should be a bit deeper. Maybe I should be in position. We've got an extra player there, but maybe I should drop in. Maybe I should keep tracking Enzo Fernandez. Actually, maybe I should start dropping back into position. He keeps glancing back until eventually he starts to retreat. But maybe it's a bit too late, because as the ball moves back to Sanchez, it comes into Enzo Fernandez, who was being marked by Hincapié, who's now retreating. Fernandez can receive it freely. Hincapié is still not in position, which means as the ball comes in, it can go to João Pedro and flicked on to Cole Palmer. Now, this doesn't lead to anything, right? But it's just another example, I think, of Arsenal players overthinking their decisions in a way they probably wouldn't have done earlier in the season.
For sure. I mean, Zubimendi, Declan Rice, players that you usually think, you know, are the ones to keep it steady. Yeah. But some of these players have also played a lot of football, James. Could that be a factor?
I think so, particularly in the case of Rice and Zubimendi. I mean, the demands on those two players are absolutely enormous, playing in midfield. Martin Zubimendi, I think I'm right in saying, certainly ahead of the Brighton game, had run more than any Premier League player. I think Declan Rice was 5th in that table. They cover a lot of ground and they play week in, week out. Zubimendi, you've got to remember as well, is in his first season in the Premier League. I think, you know, when Arsenal signed him, they imagined maybe bedding him in more slowly, but instead he became an important member of the team, an immediate starter from the get-go. And I do wonder if sort of the physical fatigue is coupled with a mental fatigue, and maybe we see that in a couple of those erratic moments from Zubimendi, for example, who had another moment against Chelsea which was sort of out of character, where he played a back pass that almost came up short. I do wonder to what extent the toll of the season is a factor in that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Jon, these players are stressed, obviously under a lot of pressure. I mean, they are only human. But you wanted to look at something that actually affected Arsenal as a collective, didn't you?
Yeah, I think when we talk about psychology, often we focus on those individual moments, some of which Alex has explained to us. But I think what's really interesting about this is from a tactical point of view, and when we're talking about tactics, usually what we're talking about is the collective decision of the team, of the coach over the team, to have the team behave in a certain way. And pressure impacts that as well. And so what I wanted to do a little bit now is to start breaking into the tactical aspects of what's going on with Arsenal in particular, just to see why it is that it feels as though Arsenal are looking more shaky when they're in positions where you might expect them to be stronger, right? So particularly winning game state, so situations where they're up in games. And I want to talk about it in particular with respect to this concept of control. Arsenal are a team who are very controlling of games, both in and out of possession. And that's a very difficult thing to do, in part because you can only control games these days if, as a collective, everyone is on the same sheet. Not only that, but the way that the tactical landscape has shifted recently has made it much harder for teams to control games. In part, that's because Pep Guardiola came along, imposed control, and dominated. And so we've reached a point now where teams are saying, we're not willing to allow you to control games. We're going to do everything in our power to try and remove that control. And one of the ways that that's manifested is in the out of possession side of the game, so man marking. When you man mark, you can reduce the amount of capacity for teams who are trying to possess the ball and control games to actually do that. So ball comes out and usually strike on one side, curving their run to stop the ball from coming back on the other side. And then on this side, everyone locks on man-man. There's no space and time for this player to do anything. As a result, like often what we're starting to see now is just teams become more direct. Sure. Much harder to control balls when you have to go more direct. And that's where the issue is. So harder to control the game with the ball, but also harder to control the game without the ball as well, because as we've said here, this team has to lock on man-man. If you mess up on that, then the opponent might have an easy route to actually play through you, right? So because it's so hard to control the game both in and out of possession, I think what we start seeing now is teams trying to find ways or situations where they can actually reduce the intensity a little bit. And that brings us on to the concept of game state, because in certain game states, Arsenal are going to change the way they're playing so that they are maybe less intense. And I think that's where we start seeing these interesting aspects of Arsenal's maybe loss of control in certain situations.
Yeah, talk about game states, that just something that affects the scoreline.
Yes, I'm glad you've asked me. This is like when they get the university student to explain something rather than the university professor who might overcomplicate it. Now, game state in its raw form, I think it's easy to understand, right? It's the state of the game. Is a team winning? Are they losing? Have they got 10 men, 11 men? How close is it to the end of the game? But what me and Jon really refer to when we're speaking about game state in a nerdy sense is how a team might behave depending on those factors. So, for example, Brentford have spent a lot of time in winning game states this season, and they're a very good team at handling winning game states. Speaking about what Jon was referring to, they take those opportunities to ease off into a block and try and attack the space in behind. They've scored a lot of fast break goals this season. But what's interesting about Arsenal, and what Jon was referring to, is while they may take that opportunity to ease off in winning game states, it might not actually be the most sensible thing for them, and it might be resulting in them losing control, even though it might seem as a safe thing to do to ease off and take that opportunity to lower the intensity. What we'll look at now is why it doesn't always seem to be paying off.
Yeah, when we talk about managing the game, sometimes fans just want Arsenal just to kill off the game instead of sort of trying to manage it in a weird way. Where does that come from? Is that a coaching thing, or is that something that's kind of within the players?
Well, I think that's really interesting, that question of to what extent is the way the teams behave in certain game states deliberate and conscious, and actually the will and intention of the coach, and to what extent is it external factors, so the way the opposition are setting up or playing, maybe psychological factors impacting on the performance. I remember Mikel Arteta once a few years ago spoke about a situation where Arsenal were in a lead and having a winning game state, and saying that's when you need to play, I think he said 300,000 passes to kill the game. And it's so interesting that now what we're seeing from this Arsenal team is almost the opposite of that, where they're struggling, I think, to have long spells of possession. They are looking more direct and seem to be going against things that Arteta has said previously. Now, is that because of what opponents are forcing them to do, or is it because of a shift in his thinking?
To go back to what I was saying before, we're now living in a world where man-to-man is everywhere, it's rife. It's much harder to control games when the opponents are going man-to-man. But there are some little tricks that you can use in order to get advantages against teams who are trying to press you man-to-man. So when the teams are going man-to-man, if you can get space in front of you, you can basically generate separation from your markers, because that's essentially what's happened here. There's a shift from marking space, so covering space zonally, to actually covering opponents. So if you can find space between your opponent, then you can start doing this thing where you pull these man-marking structures around. Often you can do this with your centre-backs in particular. So in this instance, Gabriel receives the ball with a little bit of space. What I've done is I've shown you the gap between João Pedro and him. João Pedro is going to try and go man-to-man, and we can see around the ball, Chelsea man-to-man, so trying to make it hard for Arsenal to control the ball. But what Gabriel does is he sees that he has space in front of him, and he knows that if he can move into that space before João Pedro arrives, he will be able to maintain that separation. And as a result of that, what we see is he's got an advance on João Pedro, and this poses a problem for Pedro Neto here, because he can't allow Gabriel to run directly through, and so rather than keeping up his man-marking responsibilities on Hincapié, he blocks off that running lane in order to stop the ball advancement. And as a result, Hincapié recognises that this tension exists here, and he drops off, because that means that when Gabriel gets to a certain position, he can then have a really nice out. So that's one way of being able to actually generate space even within a man-marking situation. Another technique that's really useful if you're trying to create space against man-marking is player rotations, because the players of the team in possession are the active players, right? They are going to make the first move, and then the man-marking player is going to be reactive and follow after them. And what this means is that if you are able to generate a lot of movement in your in-possession structure, you'll generate these situations where maybe you'll end up with a player in space so they can receive the ball, and again, you're making it easier for yourselves to possess the ball well. And Arsenal are really good at this. If you watch Arsenal in build-up, you will see these rotations happening all the time, and what they're so great at doing is moving the players around but still retaining the structure that allows them to possess the ball. So I've just got, again, an example from the Chelsea game here. I've just thrown up the starting structure for Arsenal here. They've just taken a goal kick, and what we start seeing Arsenal doing is introducing these movements in order to generate space that not only allows them to, maybe the players who are creating space, to get the ball, but also opens up space that can be exploited by their teammates. So here's a nice example. We see Declan Rice dropping into this space here, and Zubimendi making a counter movement in the other direction. What they're going to try and do is create space around on this side of the pitch, which maybe can be accessed by one of their teammates. With Rice dropping in, this actually pins two Chelsea players because they realise that this is a potential out ball. That creates a free player over here in Gabriel, and the ball is played to him. We then get another double movement, so Hincapié can run down the line to fill the space that's opened out by Trossard dropping into that space that Declan Rice has opened out. And in the end, the ball comes into Trossard. And again, we get another double movement, Rice filling the space that Trossard's opened out, and Trossard is now going to drop into the pivot spot. And we end up with this situation then where Trossard is now almost playing the role that Rice was playing at the beginning. Rice recognises that Hincapié is going forward, so he's going to fill the space that Hincapié opens out. And as a result, we end up with this structure. It's very similar to the structure they started in, but you've got Trossard playing in the pivot, Rice playing at fullback, and Hincapié playing almost as a wide player. And the reason they're doing that is because it's a way of creating a sort of requisite space through movement to enable them to generate the ball possession they need to build up here. It's worth saying this is a very risky way of playing, not least because you're taking risks trying to build up against a man-man opponent. If you lose the ball there, they're in a really nice situation to be able to attack you. But also, if you lose the ball, you've got players in the wrong positions, right? You've got Trossard in the Rice position, and Declan Rice, one of the best big space defenders in world football. Do you really want him defending out of a fullback role? So if you're doing this kind of thing, you've got to be pretty sure that you're going to be able to do it consistently well. And I think this is what's really interesting about what we start seeing with Arsenal when they get into winning game states, because the risk that they're willing to take at 0-0, where they need to score, they need to go ahead in games, they're much less likely to take when they are in those winning positions.
Yeah. Do you know what? Watching that, James, I could never be a pro footballer. You know, sometimes when you watch it on TV, you're like, well, yeah, I mean, I could totally have a go. That type of movement. Yeah. I mean, I'd be out of breath after Trossard's little...
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, that's sort of my observation as well. It's quite how physically demanding that is. The continual sprints and shifts in position. There's so much work going on off the ball there. And I do wonder as well to what extent that is just difficult to maintain at the same degree of intensity across 90 minutes and maybe across the season as well.
Yeah, well, I've got some examples of what happens when they get into the 1-0 game state then against Chelsea. And what we end up seeing is much more structure, I think, in terms of not really wanting to risk the sort of fluidity that they're doing earlier. So basically, Arsenal have just won the ball back. Jurrien Timber has the ball over here, and Arsenal are sort of ending up in with a situational back three. Trossard is quite central, but that's because out of possession, when the ball is on that side, Trossard is going to tuck in. So he's already there. And what we're going to actually see is once Arsenal then play the ball to their back line, everyone's just going to adopt a much more sort of safe structure. So essentially what ends up happening is Trossard returns to his spot. We have the two eights here in Eze and Rice just sitting in the half spaces. You've got the striker pinning the centre-backs, and then you've got Saka on the other side as well. Timber's a little bit further up the field, but Hincapié is just staying here. And basically there's very little movement from this point onwards. Trossard has arrived out wide, he's standing there. Rice is just sort of walking backwards. None of these players are making any kind of attempt to generate that sort of space through movement. And in the end, what ends up happening is that they bounce the ball back a few times between the two centre-backs, and then we get this counter movement here, but it's a very direct counter movement. It's Gyökeres dropping off the front line into this space, Rice finding the space behind, and so Gabriel's just going to pump the ball into Gyökeres, and he's going to try and flick the ball through to Rice. And, this could have been a good opportunity. I think what's really interesting here, and I think we should really emphasise, is that I don't think Arsenal are being more risk-averse here. I think they're shifting the emphasis for them. So whereas before it was about taking risks in possession, now they're much happier to take risks higher up the pitch and then rely on their outer possession strengths, not bail them out, but in these situations they're quite happy saying, okay, you've got to try and break us down. We're one of the best, if not the best, out of possession teams in the world. And so what they end up doing is taking very different types of risks. So play directly, get the ball in behind. Maybe if it comes off, we're 2-0 up here. If it doesn't, we believe that we can actually mitigate the out of possession situation that we're going to generate. And one more thing just on this topic of winning game states. There's only one example in the 25 minutes between Arsenal being at 1-0 up and then 1-1 later when Chelsea equalised, of them actually trying this brave build-up stuff, and it's this situation here. So we've got a little bit of fluidity already because there's a throw-in. Rice has dropped into the full-back spot, which, as we know, is going to open out space that Trossard can exploit. The ball goes to Rice, and what we immediately see Arsenal doing is trying to drop out, create movement and pull this Chelsea press forward to create space elsewhere. They're going to try and create space for Trossard. So the ball is bounced from Gabriel to Rice. Rice plays the ball to Zubamendi, and this is a fairly dangerous pass, but the reason he does that is because it's going to make Enzo Fernandez jump onto Zubamendi here. Zubamendi is just going to bounce the pass immediately back to Gabriel. This is going to pull the Chelsea press forward again and open out that space for Trossard. And as we can see, Trossard is going to do they've ended up in the same situation, right? Trossard has dropped into the Rice position. Rice is in the fullback position. Hincapié can push up. The ball ends up going back to David Raya. And in this situation, now Zubamendi is going to drop in. You can see immediately Trossard is heading in the opposite direction because the players are well coached. They know that if one of them drops, the other one finds the space. And Raya actually plays the ball to Zubamendi. So what they've done is they've created space around Zubamendi by having all of this flexible, fluid movement. In this situation, Zubamendi plays the ball directly back to Raya, puts him under a huge amount of pressure, and Raya plays the ball out. This is basically the only time in that 25 minutes where Arsenal try to do this brave, flexible build-up. And it almost goes very wrong for them. They don't try that again after that. They go direct, they look to play out of possession rather than in possession, and in the end, they end up being in a 1-1 game state because maybe they haven't been as brave on the ball, potentially.
Is this something fans notice in the stadium?
I think so, yeah. And I think there is this feeling that Arsenal, there is this temptation for them to lean into their structure, which is so strong, that sometimes when they get that lead, they don't necessarily persist with what helped give it to them. And you can understand that, right? Because defensively, they are outstanding, and more often than not, it will work for them. But I just think, presumably it's about trying to find a balance so that you keep some of these patterns going even when you are ahead in that game state.
Yeah, I think so. And I understand why Arteta does this, because Arsenal, we've said they're one of the best out-of-possession teams in the world. They're good in every phase of out-of-possession play, right? They're good at high pressing, they're good in their mid-block, they're good at box defending. It's understandable that you would say, okay, we're a very good team out of possession. Let's just try and get the ball long, maybe sneak a goal, get into that 2-0 game state. But I think there are periods of these games where actually if they did have a little bit more bravery on the ball and just took the sting out of the game a little bit with possession, it might help them as well.
Well, John's just obviously mentioned quite a few times how Arsenal are one of the best out-of-possession teams, right? Especially they lean on it, when they're winning. But for your perspective, how does that side of their game change when they are in winning game states?
It's interesting because what John has noticed is a change in strategy in possession when Arsenal go 1-0 up. But what I've noticed out of possession when Arsenal go 1-0 up is sort of a muddle in strategy between certain players. Here's a quick example first. At 0-0, Arsenal being a very good defensive team, Chelsea are going to pass the ball out to Pedro Neto, and there's a collective effort from every Arsenal player to push Chelsea back. So Hincapié first, then as Neto dribbles inside, Trossard follows him, and play keeps progressing backwards and backwards until it reaches Robert Sanchez here, and every Arsenal player is committed. Sanchez has very limited options, he's forced into an awkward pass, and Arsenal win the ball. Great effort here. It's worth highlighting as well the effort Arsenal make as a collective unit on counter-attacks. So here Chelsea's attack comes to an end, Raya has the ball, he's going to very quickly roll it to Gabriel, who's going to pump it into Eze. It then goes out to Saka out wide. We're going to speak about units here. Think of this part of the pitch as Arsenal's front unit, like they're attackers, right? Then we've got the rear unit, the defenders and the defensive midfielder. And as Saka dribbles up, notice how the rear unit is also quick to support this attack. It's not because they're trying to score, it's because if Saka's dribble doesn't come off here, as it doesn't, and the ball rolls loose, Timber's in a great position to collect that loose ball, and Arsenal can consolidate possession in the final third. Great way of pinning Chelsea back. So what happens when they go 1-0 up? How does this change? Well, what I've noticed is there seems to be a bit of indecision across the pitch, and it's not necessarily in a certain sector. It's at different parts at different times. So, similar situation, Arsenal about to counter-attack here. Through the magic of screenshots, Trossard is going to go on a Messi-esque run and reach the Chelsea box, and he's going to break into it and set up Eze. Now, look how much further back Arsenal's rear unit is. There's a much bigger gap here between the front and rear unit. So when the ball comes into Eze and he doesn't get the shot off, it rolls loose. Chelsea are able to collect this ball pretty easily. It gets to this point, it rolls to Caicedo, he's going to carry it forward. Nothing comes with this from a Chelsea perspective, but it does mean for Arsenal, they've made that great big effort to get up the pitch, and now they're going to have to make that effort to get back. Exactly, right? Which is going to play into a bit of fatigue. Maybe that's why we see in this next example, Arsenal's midfield here is quite passive. It's a few minutes later, Cole Palmer's on the ball right here. Arsenal's midfield's passive, but the defence is not. They're pretty man-oriented. This might not seem like a problem, right? All the players are tracked between the lines, except this gap starts opening up because the Arsenal players are tracking Chelsea's between the lines. And because there's no pressure from the midfield, Palmer is actually pretty free to play this in behind. You can see the run start being made. As it happens, he actually plays it backwards, but you could see the danger start cropping up here. Once again, Arsenal get away with it, but they don't get away with it in the next example I've got. Very, very similar situation to before. Arsenal going to make a collective effort to push Chelsea back from this throw-in on the right-hand side of the pitch back to Robert Sanchez. Now pay attention to this area here, the defensive line. Saliba has been tracking Cole Palmer, but he stops. He opts to maintain his position. Maybe because, wants to protect the lead, wants to maintain the shape. But Gabriel was pointing to him, you need to track Palmer, he's free. Every other Arsenal player here has committed to an aggressive press to push Chelsea back like before. Saliba's quite late to recognise this, or at least to change his mind, let's say. So Palmer's able to drop in with so much space and time. Not only can he receive the ball, he can actually turn and launch an attack. Chelsea end up reaching the Arsenal box. And once again, Arsenal have made a great big effort to push Chelsea backwards and now have to come back the other way. So that's what I meant when there's like a muddled approach here. And I think when Arsenal go 2-1 up and Chelsea go down to 10 men, these issues become even more extreme because on the one hand, Chelsea are down to 10 men. Great chance to pin them in and starve them of chances. On the other hand, you're trying to win the league and it's getting late into the game. We want to protect this lead. So we see these issues crop up again. Very passive midfield, defence is pretty man-oriented once more. Chelsea play the ball to Chalobah. He's free of pressure to play the ball forward. It goes to Malo Gusto over here, who flicks it to Liam Delap. And Delap is 1v1 against Gabriel at this point. Gabriel's a very good defender, but because Arsenal have committed forward, he's isolated 1v1. It gives Delap the chance to hold it up, plays it out wide. Chelsea are able to reach Arsenal's box from a situation where Arsenal had 5 players against Chelsea's 3.
Right.
And it's late in the game. They could have kept them in, but now they're conceding an attack against a team with 10 men. I think the most egregious example, though, is as we enter the beginning of injury time. This time the midfield's more aggressive. Yeah. They're looking to push Chelsea back. Basically, every Arsenal player is doing so, except these two, Saliba and Timber. Chelsea make the pass here. Timber is so deep, so much deeper than the rest of the team, that Delap, who's made a run and Saliba's tried to play him offside, is still kept on. Maybe you could say it's an error from Timber, but I think it's Timber and Saliba being fearful of Delap and Garnacho as well, making runs in behind, whereas the rest of the Arsenal players are thinking, no, we could be aggressive here, we can pin Chelsea in. And as a result, Chelsea can get in behind, Delap can reach the Arsenal box, and once again, Arsenal players having to race back to defend. And I wanted to ask James about this because I was speaking to a very extremely passionate Arsenal fan, Kaya Kainak, outside. And when I asked him what he would like Arsenal to do at this point, it would be, I want to sit in, I want to play safe. Whereas I think other people would say, we can pin Chelsea in, they're down to 10 men. So genuinely, as a fan, what would you want to see Arsenal do here?
I think it's interesting. Arsenal faced Chelsea with 10 men twice this season, and on both occasions, I think have kind of struggled to control the game. I think with the additional man, they certainly have the technical capability to keep the ball and starve Chelsea of possession and chances. But I think that what you're highlighting is sort of the human nature of the players, that with something to protect, and I don't just mean a lead in the context of this game, but with a league title potentially on the line as well. I do think that the players fall into patterns where they are maybe more comfortable, more habituated. They lean into what they perceive as the strengths of the team. And what's interesting is watching Mikel Arteta kind of anecdotally on the touchline. He has often been quite agitated. If I think of the games where Arsenal had the lead against Chelsea or against Wolves, he's cut quite an agitated figure on the sidelines, which to me suggests that something's not quite going to plan.
Yeah, we've got this quotes from him after the Chelsea game. So he talking in particular about, I think, the injury time period, which was very hearts in mouth moment for a lot of, no doubt, playing staff, coaching staff and fans. But and I'm sorry, I'm going to make you relive some of the injury time stuff here. Sorry about this. Sorry about this, guys. But this is the quote. So he's saying we're going to have to go through some difficult patches to win games. We certainly did that against Chelsea. We took the moment to score the second goal, and after the red card, we all expected a very different outcome in the last few minutes. But we didn't manage to control and dominate that scenario as well as we wanted.
It's really interesting because Mikel Arteta, he very rarely uses the word control. He doesn't like it. He thinks it's very passive. He likes dominate.
Well, he used both there, right? So that's kind of fun. I think it's really interesting when we look at some of the scenarios that open out in that injury time, because I think this then moves from tactical decisions that are being made to a lot of decision making by the players, just collapsing the tactics entirely. So this is very early on in the injury time period. This is a free kick for Arsenal, and Arsenal are just like, we are not going to risk build up at all here, right? We're going to go long, we're going to overload this area, and we're going to try and win the ball back, which is fine. If you're Arsenal, you often will come out on top in these situations. But in this instance, actually, the ball bounces around a little bit, comes out for Chelsea, and then we end up in this scenario where, because Arsenal have overloaded on one side, it's very easy for Chelsea to just play a couple of passes, move the ball into Garnacho, and because Arsenal are having to run backwards with momentum, it creates this situation where Garnacho easily gets to the edge of the box. He plays this ball in. We've got Liam Delap at the back post here running in, and it ends up being a save that Raya has to make, all because Arsenal were trying to be super safe, overload one area, get the ball up the pitch and keep it there. They weren't able to do that, and it results in a very dangerous situation.
Even in still form, that makes me feel sick.
That's a new one for you, John, making our guests feel sick.
Nauseous.
It continues to happen, though, I'm afraid. Here's a great example. We've got a situation here where Arsenal, they got away with the corner that resulted from the Raya save. They get the ball back. We've got Gabriel with the ball here. And you think, this is a great situation for Arsenal, right? They've got 8 players in their own half. There's only 5 Chelsea players because Chelsea have got a player sent off at this point. If they were brave, would they keep the ball in this kind of area with the confidence that around the goalkeeper they've got an extra player? They should be able to keep the ball for a long period and take the sting out of the game, at least get a few minutes out of the game, and then if they need to, if they are brought under pressure, then go long. No pressure really arrives, they go long, and they're playing the ball into a situation here where you've got Havertz, you've got Saka. Okay, this is a 2v2, but what's the intended outcome here? Maybe Saka wins the ball. There's no connections between any Arsenal player apart from these front two. The rest of the Chelsea players are going to drop in. You're simply playing the ball from a position of advantage to a position of disadvantage and losing the ball immediately. You're not even trying to make the most of that numerical advantage that they have here. And then we start seeing the players making poor decisions. So here's an instance. Chelsea have overloaded on this side because they played the ball long. The ball is coming into, I think this is Zubimendi, and look, he has all the time in the world here to take it down. It does arrive at him awkwardly, but if he's more aware of, I think, of what's around him, he's like, okay, this is fine, I can take a touch. I've got Hincapié in space next to me, that there's really no issues here. But instead he tries to head the ball, it moves the ball into this dangerous area, and then all 3 Arsenal players converge on the ball. Again, this is not because the Arsenal players don't want it enough. It's almost like they want it too much. They're like, we're going to respond immediately. They fall on the ball. And what ends up happening is that Reece James can get forward into this area in behind because Hincapié, rather than thinking, okay, Zubimendi's here, he'll be able to cover. Eze is covering the Chelsea player. I could just hold the space, and if that pass comes on, then I can get it. In the end, the ball goes down the line. And then they have another one of these moments where they have to collapse into the box. Everything's a little bit panicked. The ball comes back out. out. And now what we've got is a situation where Chelsea, a team with a player down, have a free player in Moises Caicedo. No one is tracking him at all. And you've got, I think this is Saka here on the edge of the box. Saka does eventually recognise the danger here, but I think in this situation, the Arsenal team should be thinking, we have an extra player here. We can afford to go man-to-man across the pitch, and we'll still have a spare player. So Saka can come out here and he will know that there should be someone covering that space. In the end, it takes him so long to get to Caicedo that Caicedo can just take a nice touch. Yes, he's under pressure by Saka in the end, but he can just float the ball into this area. It becomes very dangerous, and that's when the Joao Pedro overhead kick happens. Fortunately for Arsenal, he's in an offside position. It's these sorts of situations where you can see that the players then are making these individual decisions that are putting more and more pressure on them. And I think those are inevitable, I think, towards the end of games. But I think if Arsenal had got into a scenario where they were able to be more than one goal ahead by the end, that just immediately takes the sting out of this situation.
You mentioned sort of individual decisions, and obviously Arsenal have an exceptional squad and a very, very good team. I just wonder, do you think there's anything in the idea that maybe the individual technical or psychological profile of the players maybe isn't the most suited to these conditions, to keeping the ball? If I think about, Arsenal have been coping recently, they've not had Martin Odegaard in the squad, for example. Yeah. Jorginho left last summer. I can imagine in exactly this situation, Jorginho would be one of the players Mikel Arteta would turn to, because he can just do that rat-a-tat-tat, keep it, knock it about. Obviously, Rice, Zubimendi, outstanding players, but do you think that they are that sort of player?
I agree, yes. I think that, when you lean into maybe the out-of-possession side of the game, you maybe compromise a little bit on the technical qualities sometimes across the pitch. And so I think that probably plays into why Arsenal are much happier going long in those winning game states. I also think that maybe what's going on here is that Arsenal are a team that are so well coached by Arteta. Arteta is one of the greatest managers that we've seen in world football. The problem is, and you often see this with teams when they end up in these weird game states where they're 10v11, the players are almost relying on their coaching in 11v11 situations. Right. It almost feels like they don't think through things sort of individually on the pitch.
And organically as you would,
exactly.
Just to enjoy the game, right?
Right, and think we can go man-to-man across the pitch, we know that. Often we're trying to keep a +1 at the back just because it gives you an advantage. What we can do against 10 men is play man-to-man across the pitch with a +1 advantage at the back. That should give us confidence that we can be even more dangerous. And again, pressure does this to everyone. These are elite athletes. The Jurien Timber quote where he said, I'm not going to lie, we are feeling the pressure here. But I do wonder whether or not this is maybe just we rely on the coach to tell us what to do in every situation. And when a situation that we're not used to comes up, then they don't necessarily know how to act in it.
Yeah, with all this being said, Opta still has Arsenal 94% to win the Premier League, James. And also, look, at the time of recording after the midweek games, Arsenal are currently 7 points ahead of Manchester City in the Premier League. We keep talking about Arsenal being braver, but at the end of the day, as long as they're winning, getting results, perhaps winning ugly, that's all that matters.
Sure, it's first world problems, definitely, for Arsenal fans. And I think Arsenal are sort of blessed in that I'm not sure many other teams could necessarily kind of withstand this sort of pressure. Arsenal do have that incredible foundation to kind of fall back upon of their defensive solidity. And that is a gift, really. That's what enables them, if you think of the recent Brighton game on Wednesday night, to ride out situations like that relatively comfortably. I think Mikel Arteta, though, he being so demanding and always wanting more from his players, he will be looking at what they can do to kind of manage those situations better. Because let's not forget as well, we're going into a period of the season where Arsenal are still fighting on full fronts. They've still got other competitions to consider. I do think the psychological and physical demands on this group are so significant. So anything he can do to bring that temperature down in game, I think would be really, really valuable to him. So I'm fascinated to see how he can adapt, how the team, maybe as well with that little bigger cushion in the Premier League, can play with that little bit more freedom or feel capable to take a couple more risks. That might be really beneficial to them.
I feel like as well, he's got to not only communicate that to the players, but also the fans. It's interesting that you say they managed to do it well against Brighton, but we're looking at the home game at the Emirates, and that seems to be where the pressure really is on because you've got all the fans with you. Kind of reminds me of Marseille and how they seem to do worse at home despite having that famous atmosphere, right? So it'd be interesting to see how Arteta handles that with the players, but also how he might be able to communicate that to the fans to calm down at certain points.
Absolutely, yeah. And listen, that energy, the nervous energy in the stands, it can be a real positive, can't it, if it's focused appropriately. But there certainly have been times, and I think any Arsenal fan who's been at the stadium regularly this season will tell you where, you could cut the tension with a knife, and the players wouldn't be human if that didn't impact them or affect them in some way. I do think that, what we're seeing is a team who have almost a sort of unprecedented degree of pressure on them because there is all this expectation that's built up over many, many years. It's quite rare that you see a team be runners-up consecutively 3 times and then take that final step. I think if they do, the future for this group is incredibly promising, because I think once they clear that psychological hurdle, I think they'll be able to better implement some of these tactical ideas, and crucially, they'll be able to retain their composure. Yeah. I think composure is the key attribute here, and I think it's something that almost has to be earned, and hopefully Arsenal can do that in this final period of the season.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football.